My name is Arya, 36 years old, a mother of two and formerly an emergency room nurse in Montana. Last Christmas Eve, while snow blanketed the porch, my mother threw my luggage and my kids onto the street just because I opened the door for a bleeding man who had collapsed outside our house. He looked at me terrified and whispered, "Don't call the police, they'll kill me." Meanwhile, my mother shouted coldly, "If you choose a stranger over your family, then get out and don't come back." And the door closed behind me, for good. Have you ever been turned away by your own family just for doing the right thing? If you've ever felt utterly alone in a place that should have felt like home, leave a comment below. Tap like if you believe that saving someone's life isn't madness. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happened after that night will keep you listening. I carried my younger child on my back, one hand gripping my older daughter's. The bleeding man leaned into me heavily as if every bone in his body might shatter. Snow clung to our boots and the wind pushed against us like it didn't want us to leave. I didn't know who I was helping, but I knew I couldn't leave him to die in a night that cold. The drive stretched over 50 miles, roads I'd driven hundreds of times in my old job, but tonight they felt like a maze. Every time the headlights cut across bare trees, I glanced at my kids. They were asleep, heads resting together, unconsciously curled into the only safety they had left, me. When we reached the hospital, I pounded on the emergency entrance, shouting like I was the one bleeding out. The doors opened, harsh light pouring out. A nurse rushed over, calling for backup. I barely managed to say, "Accident, bleeding, unknown identity." They placed him on a stretcher and pulled off his snow-soaked coat. Something slipped from his inner pocket. A black plastic ID card with a faded silver border. A staff member picked it up, then froze. His eyes flicked to the name, then back to me. "Silas Monroe?" he murmured as if he couldn't believe it. A nearby doctor spun around at the name, asking rapid questions. The nurse leaned in and whispered something to him, and I saw the doctor stiffen, then signal the team to move faster. I stood there, numb, a chill crawling up my spine. A hospital security officer approached me and asked quietly, "Do you have any relation to him?" "I don't know who he is," I answered honestly. "He collapsed on my doorstep." The officer nodded, hand resting lightly on the radio clipped to his shoulder. "We'll need you to wait. Someone will come talk to you." I led my kids to the waiting room. They didn't fully understand what was happening, but I was beginning to realize I had stepped into something far bigger than myself. Less than 30 minutes later, two men in black coats walked in. One wore a badge with the small print, Federal Bureau of Investigation. They came straight toward me. One asked in a calm, firm voice, "Are you Arya Rivers?" I nodded and held my children closer. "We need to speak with you in private." I raised an eyebrow. "I haven't done anything wrong. I just helped a bleeding man at my door." "We know," the other one said. "But there are things you don't know. And if you don't listen now, you might never get another chance." I looked down at my kids. The first agent caught the look and said gently, "We'll have someone watch them. You can see them through the glass." I followed them into a small room near the reception. The fluorescent lighting cast a dull glow, making the air feel heavier. "The man you brought in is named Silas Monroe," one of them began. "He was the key witness in a federal investigation that stalled 6 years ago, after he vanished without a trace." I stayed calm, but my heartbeat kicked up. "I don't know anything about him. I just saw someone who needed help." "We don't doubt your intentions," the other said, though his tone shifted. "But you need to understand, people who've been in contact with Silas don't always stay safe." I went silent. The room felt like it thickened around me. "Do you know the name Randall Bishop?" the first one continued. I shook my head. "He's one of the people Silas accused, and he used to do business with your father." I flinched. "You are now very close to a case that's never been made public. And you've unknowingly brought your children into it." I shot up from the chair. "I didn't bring anyone into anything. I saved a life. If you think that's a crime, go ahead and arrest me." The other agent stayed calm. "We're not here to arrest you, Arya. But to protect you and your kids, you need to listen. If Silas wakes up, everything might change. But if he dies, there are people who will make sure no one's left to mention his name." I was breathing fast. My wrists damp with sweat even though it was still winter outside. "So, what do I do?" I asked. "Wait. Don't talk to anyone. Don't go home. And if anyone besides us tries to contact you, even friends or family, don't trust them. We'll reach out again when Silas stabilizes." I nodded slowly as if every joint in my body had turned to ice. When I returned to the waiting room, my kids were still there. My daughter was sketching something on paper from the reception counter. My son was resting against her, eyelids fluttering. They looked peaceful, like the world outside hadn't shifted. I pulled them into my arms, never taking my eyes off the glass doors behind me. And deep in my chest, a question burned: had I just saved a life, or unlocked a door that would never close again? I sat curled up in the cramped motel room, the yellow glow of a desk lamp casting shadows on the peeling walls. My kids were asleep, their breathing soft and steady, tucked under blankets up to their chins. Outside, the snow kept falling like the sky was trying to bury everything that had happened tonight. I turned on my phone, only 18% battery left, but I couldn't stop. My fingers trembled as I typed into the search bar: Silas Monroe missing. The screen lit up with a flood of results. Grainy photos. Old headlines from back in 2017. A few investigative articles with broken links. Names scattered like shards. Larkspur Energy federal land deals in New Mexico, dark money from Arizona state senators. I clicked on one titled, Silas Monroe, the whistleblower who vanished and the empty seat between politics and crime. He had been the chief technical officer of Larkspur Energy, a company contracted for federal clean energy initiatives. According to the article, he discovered major funding discrepancies disguised as infrastructure investments, which were really shell deals transferring indigenous land to ghost corporations. I swallowed hard. One name stood out: Randall Bishop. I'd seen that name before. It was right there in an old fax my father had left on his desk years ago. I remembered that day clearly. I'd gone home to drop off some work documents. Dad was sitting on the back porch, papers in one hand and iced tea in the other. When I walked out, he quickly closed the folder and gave a forced smile. "Old paperwork. Nothing that concerns you," he said. I didn't think much of it then. I trusted him. He was always so careful, so upright. Never had a single stain on his name. But now, after reading nearly 2,000 words of that article, all those details I once ignored were clawing their way back. Randall Bishop was the first person Silas named in his whistleblower complaint. He was also the same man who once sat at our dinner table when I was in high school. I leaned back, my head bumping softly against the wall. All my life I believed my father was a good man. A man who demanded honesty above all else. He used to say, "There's nothing worse than living a life you have to hide." But maybe he was hiding more than I ever knew. The phone rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. A number I didn't recognize appeared on the screen. I answered. Rivers. A man's voice, deep and clear. "Yes. This is Lieutenant Shaw from the Gallatin County Sheriff's Department. I'd like to verify a few details about the incident at the hospital tonight." I gripped the phone tighter. "I just brought in an injured man," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yes, we received a notification from the feds. But I need to ask, did you know who he was before bringing him in?" "No." He collapsed on my porch, covered in blood, and there was a snowstorm. "I'm a nurse," I reacted on instinct. The man paused for a few seconds. "We're not saying you did anything wrong. But you should understand, when the federal government takes interest in a name like Silas Monroe, anyone connected to him gets scrutinized. Including you." I heard the warning beneath his words. A gentle reminder that I was wading into deep waters. "I was just trying to save someone's life," I repeated. "We understand. But from now on, if anyone approaches you or your children, you call us first. Even if it's a government employee, unless they have proper authorization or clear identification. Do you understand me?" "I do. Stay in touch. And stay safe." He hung up. I set the phone down on the table, my mind spinning. It wasn't the police that unsettled me. It was my own family. A thin, sharp fear cut through me like paper. My father might have known about this. He might have been part of it. I pulled out the old laptop I'd packed in the backpack. Logged into my personal email, dug through the archives. Years ago, while clearing the garage after my father passed, I had snapped a few photos of documents because a name stood out. Back then, I thought it was just nostalgia. Now I opened each photo and my chest tightened as I saw Randall Bishop's signature. right next to the words mineral rights transfer. Below that was the signature of Andrew Rivers, my father. I inhaled sharply, my fingers trembling as I scrolled through the lines. The wording was clear. The ink was unmistakably blue. The last piece of the puzzle had just snapped into place. I stood and pulled back the curtain. The snow had eased. Streetlights poured pale light over the empty parking lot. Wind still slipped through the cracks in the window, carrying a chill that didn't come from the weather, but from the weight of loss. I didn't know what part my father had played in this power game. But I knew one thing: he wasn't innocent. And I couldn't keep pretending I didn't see it anymore. I sat at the edge of the bed, the soft yellow glow of the lamp washing over the worn-out carpet. My two kids were still fast asleep on the mattress pushed up against the wall, breathing gently beneath the thin blanket. Outside, the snowstorm had quieted, but inside me another storm was brewing, silent but relentless. I pulled the old fabric suitcase from under the bed and unzipped it. Nestled between the kids' clothes and schoolbooks was a small, scratched brown wooden box. Josh's box. The man I thought I had grieved and let go 6 years ago. I opened the lid. The scent of old paper mixed with the faint aroma of peppermint from the letter he'd written when our daughter was born. I carefully pushed aside the photos and personal notes. Beneath them were neatly stapled folders, labeled in blue ink with his familiar handwriting. One of them read, Land Lease Contract, Zone 11B, Montana/2015. I opened it. The pages were crisp, the header from a company I had never heard of, North Ridge Development Inc. On the last page was my signature, full name, home address, social security number. But I had never signed this. And I certainly never agreed to lease land to anyone. I froze. My eyes locked on the curling letters at the bottom. I compared them to a few other documents in the box. The slant, the flourish, the parentheses, they were identical. Someone had learned to forge my handwriting. A vague memory flickered. That summer, during a small backyard party at my parents' house, my mom had called me onto the porch and handed me a stack of papers saying, just insurance stuff for your dad. Sign quickly so you can help me set the table. I'd been tired, didn't look closely, and signed because I trusted her. Now I knew I had given away far more than just a signature. A soft sound came from the bed. I turned. Silas was awake. His eyes still cloudy from painkillers, but something inside them had reawakened, heavy and sharp. You kept those. His voice was hoarse, laced with both fatigue and emotion. I couldn't throw them out, I said, gently closing the folder. Did you know Josh? He nodded slightly. We worked together on an internal oversight subcommittee with the Department of Energy. He wasn't just some engineer. Josh had a knack for spotting errors in hundreds of contracts with just a glance. And that made him a target. I clenched my hands. He died in a car crash, I said, as if saying it again could help me believe it. The report said he lost control on a mountain road. It was raining. Silas shook his head slowly. It was staged. He had gathered enough evidence to take down 3 major companies and a federal official. He called me a week before he disappeared. Said he was ready to hand over the files to investigators. I sat beside him, feeling like something inside me was splintering. I didn't know, I whispered. I had no idea he was involved in anything like that. He was trying to keep you and the kids safe, Silas replied. He once told me, if I fail, I want her to live on untouched. But they didn't stop at him. I thought of the forged contract. Of how my parents had pushed me to sign so many things they never explained. Of last night's phone call from the officer, his voice carrying the weight of an entire mountain cast in shadow. Did he ever say, who was behind it all? I asked. Silas took a long breath. Randall Bishop is the biggest lead. But there's one name I've never dared to say out loud. Someone who appears on a lot of the dirty contracts. Someone who's been to your house. I looked at him, waiting. His lips moved. Your father, he said. Andrew Rivers. I went cold. The room shrank around me, suffocating. Everything I had ever believed, everything I'd built my life upon, in that moment, began to crumble from its roots. Silas turned his face toward the wall, his voice quieter now. Josh suspected your father. He never said it directly, but he began reviewing old land deals in Montana. That's when things started going bad. I got up and walked to the window. Outside, the streetlight glinted on a fresh layer of ice. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass. My heart was pounding, not from fear but from something rising. A slow-burning fury that had been dormant for years, now refusing to stay quiet. Where did Josh keep the original copies of those documents? I asked, turning to Silas. Maybe somewhere nearby. He said there was a safe place to be used only in case of emergency. But I don't know exactly. I nodded slowly. At the bottom of the box were still a few unopened stacks of papers. And if I was right, I knew Josh would never leave without leaving me something to follow. I bent down and lifted the cardboard liner beneath the bottom of the box. A thin envelope, sealed with tape across the corners, appeared. On the outside, 3 italicized words were written, "For Arya only." I didn't open it right away. I placed my hand on it, feeling the slightly crumpled surface of the paper under my fingertips. Part of me was afraid. Part of me was ready. Because now I wasn't just searching for answers for myself, but for someone who had been killed to keep me alive. And for the 2 children sleeping peacefully behind me. I was still holding the envelope with "For Arya only" written on it when I heard glass shatter on the other side of the room. Instinct dropped me to the floor, pulling both kids close. A heavy object crashed through the broken window frame, followed by a tall, masked man diving in, his movements sharp and purposeful as if rehearsed. I didn't scream. I didn't have time. My body moved before my mind could catch up. My hand grabbed the mini fire extinguisher hanging near the door, lifted it with both arms, and swung it hard at his arm just as he reached for the baby's blanket. A raspy growl burst through the mask, but I didn't stop. I swung again, striking his leg hard enough to throw him off balance. "Run!" I shouted to my kids, yanking Silas up while shoving the children toward the door. I didn't look back. There was no space for hesitation. The hallway was slick, the red glow of the exit sign at the end like a lifeline in the dark sea. We bolted outside into the night air that sliced through skin like glass. The cold sealed around my face. Footsteps echoed behind us, but no gunfire. He didn't want to make noise. That terrified me more. My rental car was parked tight against the side wall. I flung open the back door, threw the kids inside, then ran around to help Silas, who was limping, face pale. I dove into the driver's seat, turned the key, started the engine. The motor groaned like it too was panicking. As the car began to roll forward, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He stood in the middle of the lot, watching, pulling something glinting from his coat pocket. But he didn't fire. Maybe because of the children. Maybe because someone told him not to. I wasn't waiting to find out. Not until we turned off the main road and vanished into the trees did I realize my hands were trembling so badly I could barely grip the wheel. The kids were unusually quiet. My daughter clutched her brother's hand, her eyes wide and unblinking. I reached one hand back to touch her leg, trying to reassure her, though I was drowning in 1,000 unanswered questions myself. Silas leaned his head against the window, breathing hard. "They know I'm alive," he said between gasps. "They won't stop. But I have something that will end this." I didn't ask. I just drove. We sped down frozen dirt roads, headlights flashing across black pine branches stretching like claws. Each minute passed like a choked breath. I turned onto an old trail with no markers. A road I'd traveled as a child, where my father once brought me and my brother camping every summer. I never thought I'd return. Certainly not with the broken pieces of my life beside me. At the end of the road stood a small, slanted cabin, moss-covered with rotting wooden walls. An abandoned lookout post from the Cold War era, now only visited by deer or people no one wanted to find. I stopped the car but didn't kill the engine. For a few seconds I sat still, hands gripping the wheel, ears straining for every sound. Then I opened the door and rushed the children inside. The cabin was pitch dark, the smell of dampness thick. I felt around for a switch. No power, but a flashlight hung by a rope on the wall still had working batteries. I swept the beam across the room. Folding chairs, a rusted wood stove, and a wooden table covered in dust so thick a single touch would leave a perfect handprint. Silas collapsed into a chair, eyes shut. I closed the door, grabbed blankets from the car to wrap the kids, then shone the light into a shadowy corner behind the old stove. Beneath a crooked floorboard I found a rusted padlock. I used my pocket knife to pry it open. Under the wood was a military-style metal box, coated in old anti-rust oil. I lifted it onto the table. I opened the box. Inside was an old laptop, its power cord neatly coiled beside it. I plugged it into the portable inverter I happened to bring in my backpack, originally meant to charge my daughter's e-reader. The screen booted slowly, emitting a soft buzz. The operating system was outdated. The interface looked like it hadn't been updated in 20 years. The hard drive held only one folder labeled with code, j.rsm/redacted. I clicked the folder. Inside were a video file and several documents. I opened the video first. The screen was blurry at first, but after a few seconds Josh's face appeared. Dim lighting. Filmed in a dark room. His voice came through, calm, steady and clear. "If you're watching this, I'm probably already gone. My name is Joshua Rivers. I was a lead engineer at Larkspur Energy, and I hold evidence showing that at least 3 private companies, along with several federal officials, colluded to seize public and native-owned land across the western United States." I clenched my sleeve. He continued, detailed, coherent, listing full names, dates, locations, contracts. Not a single word faltered. And then he looked straight into the camera. "If you're watching this, Arya, I'm sorry. I kept too much to myself. I just wanted you and the kids to live in peace. But if you've come this far, I trust you know what to do." I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just sat still, hands resting on the cold keyboard. Inside me, grief and rage tangled into a quiet but unshakable resolve. Behind me, Silas shifted. "That's the only copy," he said, voice tight. "Josh sent it to me, said if anything happened I had to give it to someone he trusted most. I didn't know he meant you." I turned and met Silas's eyes. "He was right," I said. "And I won't let anyone bury this again." I watched the video again, even though each viewing tore a new wound in my chest. Josh sat in that narrow room, eyes sunken, stubble thick, but his voice never wavered. Midway through, he pulled up a digital map, federal land charts marked in red, orange, and yellow. Then he pointed to a small cluster of squares along the map's edge, places I had always assumed were just forest or empty desert. "This land," Josh said, "belonged to indigenous families long before the state government even existed. But according to internal files, it was reclassified in 1998, based on maps altered by a company called Conterra Group, led by Andrew Rivers." I stopped breathing. Every time that name passed his lips, my heart clenched. Josh looked directly into the lens. He wasn't alone. In those meetings, his wife, Margaret Rivers, was also present. I saw her with my own eyes signing approval documents in an internal meeting on November 12, 2016. The footage was extracted and sent to 2 secure sources. The screen faded for a moment, then revealed a large conference room, dimly lit with yellow lights. The camera appeared handheld, hidden likely inside a briefcase or coat. The image wobbled slightly, but the audio was clear. In the frame, I saw my mother, Margaret, seated at the head of the table, hair pinned high, wearing the ivory blazer I remembered from my brother's wedding. She didn't say much. Occasionally nodded, signed a few documents pushed in front of her. A man off to the right reminded, "This is the reclassification file for Federal Lot 17 under directive from the Department of the Interior." My mother replied softly but firmly, "I've reviewed it. Forward it to management." I shut off the video, my body frozen. Not from the lack of heat, but because I had just realized both my mother and father had placed their hands on actions that Josh gave his life to expose. I didn't wait. I called my mother. The phone rang 3 times before someone picked up. Her voice came through, calm as ever, as if she'd just set her teacup down. "Arya." I didn't mince words. I just watched the video. Silence lingered on the other end before she finally spoke. No surprise, no panic. "What video?" "Josh's. He mentioned Dad. Both of you were involved in manipulating land maps. I saw you in that 2016 meeting." Still not a single sigh, no sound of shifting in her chair. Then her voice came steady and cold. "That was the past. The past doesn't stay buried when it carries the blood of the innocent," I said, each word gritted through clenched teeth. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. "Your father did what he had to do to protect this family. We weren't born into wealth. We had no power. We had one shot to climb, and he didn't let it slip away." I couldn't understand. By stealing land from others? By signing off on falsified maps and pushing indigenous families off land they've lived on for hundreds of years? That's what you call protecting a family. She answered like she was scolding a stubborn child. Don't destroy your life chasing empty ideals, Arya. Ideals don't feed your kids. They don't keep a roof over your head or pay hospital bills. Your father knew that. He did what had to be done. I sat frozen. For a moment, I didn't recognize the voice speaking. This was the woman who once rocked me to sleep when I had a fever, who used to brush my hair every night through high school. But now her voice scraped like brittle fingernails clinging to a past she refused to let go. I don't know what's kept you silent all these years, I said, but I won't be like you. I can't stay quiet knowing Josh didn't die in some accident. He died because our parents helped the very people who profit by burying others beneath stolen soil. Her voice dropped low like wind slipping through cracked windows. You won't win, Arya. The people behind this, they're not the kind you can fight. You should walk away. For the kids. If not for yourself. I gripped the phone. Do you know Josh left me a final message? He didn't ask me to forgive anyone. He just said, if you're alive, you'll know what to do. She didn't respond. I continued. I don't need your help. I just wanted you to know. I'm not stopping. Her voice barely above a whisper now. You're like your grandfather. Always believed in justice. Always thought truth would win on its own. But you know something, Arya? In this world, truth without power is just a whisper in a storm. I pulled the phone from my ear. I didn't hang up. Just let it drop to the table. Then I sat, the cold air closing in, laptop screen still dimly lit, Josh's face frozen mid-frame. I stared into his eyes. They held something I never saw in my mother's. Not ideals, but faith. Faith that truth could be protected, if someone was brave enough not to let go. I stayed there long after the call ended, the light from the laptop screen slowly fading like my belief in the family I thought I had. Outside, the snow kept falling. But inside that abandoned outpost, the air felt frozen in place. Everything Josh had exposed, my mother's terrifying silence. It pressed down on me like cold ash over my chest. I thought I couldn't be hurt any further. Until Dylan called. My younger brother, the golden one. A high-profile litigation attorney in Chicago, always wearing a luxury watch and speaking like he was in court, even during family dinners. He had always done everything right in our parents' eyes. And I was the dropout who studied nursing, got married before turning 24 and became a mom of 2 soon after. Dylan and I were never close. After Josh's funeral, he didn't come. Just sent a bouquet and a short message. My condolences. Stay well. Yet now, just as I shut the laptop, my phone lit up. Dylan Rivers. I hesitated, then answered. Are you okay? His voice was lower than I remembered. Not cold, but distant. Depends how you define that word, I said. Mom just told me not to ruin my life with foolish ideals. Dylan sighed. She's always believed that. And you? What do you think about falsified maps, illegal land transfers? About the fact that our parents signed off on pushing hundreds of people off their land? He didn't answer right away. I heard a soft tapping sound, maybe his pen against a desk. How long have you known? Dylan asked. A few days, I said. Josh left me a video. And some documents. Now I know that our parents were part of it. He exhaled slowly. So what are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted. But I'm not burying it. There was a short pause, then he said quieter now. If you go public, you'll lose everything. Not just Mom. The rest of the family. Friends. Whatever name you've built. The people in charge won't let this slide. And I won't be able to stand with you if you go forward. I lowered my head to my knees, my lips trembling. Good. Because I never expected you to stand with me. I just hope you won't stand in my way. He was quiet for a while longer. There's something you need to see. Check your email in 10 minutes. I'm not using a normal channel. What is it? He didn't answer. Just said, look at it. You'll understand. I won't call again. The call ended as abruptly as it began. I set the phone down, my heart in turmoil. Not long after, the email arrived. A link to a secure data vault with a one-time access code. I opened it using the old laptop. Inside was a single file. Recipient_data_03-19 confidential.pdf. I opened it. The first page was a table. Names, positions, payment dates, amounts received, internal transfer tags. The names slammed into me like sledgehammers. John Merritt, Mayor of Bozeman; Senator Clarissa Wilde, State of Montana; Senator Edwin Clark, State of Wyoming. Each row had evidence: bank statements, IP logs, timestamps. Some even included photos from meetings, clips of internal emails. I scrolled fast, then returned to the top. A small italic note read, "This file was extracted from internal records of Conterra Legal Services, not to be released without prosecutorial order." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of it all. My brother. The one they'd always praised. He had just handed me the key to an entire fraud network our parents once served. I checked my inbox again. Another email, "Not for you. For Josh. And because I'm tired too. D." I stared at that line. No long explanation. No drama. But enough to tell me he had been fighting in silence all these years. Maybe not everyone in this family had turned a blind eye. Maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. And even if Dylan couldn't walk beside me, he gave me a weapon no one else dared to touch. I saved the file, encrypted a backup, and renamed it after the day Josh died. Not to mourn, but to remind myself that some people go quiet so others can speak. And I will speak, for Josh, for Dylan, and for myself. I sat in the car, hands clenched tightly on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the federal building in downtown Denver. The cold glass walls reflected the pale morning light, as if the whole city were holding its breath, waiting to see what would be exposed. My 2 kids were still fast asleep in the back seat, curled under a blanket, holding hands like they'd never let go. I turned, brushed my daughter's hair gently, and stepped out of the car. Silas was already waiting at the rear entrance, his face gaunt, a scarf wrapped around his neck to cover the still healing scar. He nodded slightly when he saw me, his gaze needing no words. We both understood, there was no turning back. A week earlier, I had sent all the documents to an investigative journalist named Fiona Grant, known for exposing a major banking scandal in Missouri. I chose her because of how she wrote about victims, not with sensationalism but with compassion. In my letter, I had only one request. If the story went public, protect the identity of my children. I didn't need to be hailed as brave. I just wanted my kids to grow up like other children, not labeled as the whistleblower's kids. As I entered the grand lobby, I received a guest badge and followed Silas up to the 5th floor, the secure hearing chamber. Each step echoed with the weight of words Josh never got to say, of dreams he held, of a death that was never clearly explained on any certificate. The room was wide, painted white, with a long lightwood table. On one side sat the federal prosecutor and legal team, on the other representatives of the accused. I recognized some faces from newspapers, from family charity events we once attended. Now they sat still, suits crisp, faces void of polite smiles. Only coldness and calculation remained. My mother was already there. She sat in the gallery, wearing a thick cardigan, her hair tied low. She stared at me without blinking as I passed. I didn't nod. I didn't need to. My presence was the only answer she'd ever get for everything she once wanted me to stay silent about. When the hearing began, a federal attorney opened with an overview of the investigation. From Silas Monroe's testimony to internal emails, falsified land maps, and the files I'd submitted, it was all cross-verified by multiple sources. With each name mentioned, I saw fists tighten, eyes dart away, lips pressed so hard they turned pale. When it was my turn, I stood and slowly walked to the witness stand. I laid out everything: how I found Silas at my door, how my mother threw me and the kids out into the snowy night, how I opened the wooden box Josh left behind, and the files inside that showed me what kind of world the man I loved had stepped into, and why he never came back. "My husband didn't die in an accident," I said, my voice carrying through the room. "He died because he knew too much, and someone feared that if he lived, the truth would live with him." I presented the video. The large screen behind me lit up with Josh's face, dim under a weak lamp, but his voice, clear and strong. The room froze as he explained the scheme behind manipulating land maps, how shell companies bought land at dirt-cheap prices thanks to covert government interference. Then the footage shifted to my mother in a meeting. The moment she signed the files, pointed at the map, no one could plead ignorance anymore. I didn't turn to look at her. But I heard the soft scrape of a chair. A stifled sob, then a quiet, trembling voice. I have something to say. All eyes turned. My mother stood, eyes red but her steps steady. She walked to the prosecutor, whispered something. After a few minutes of exchange, they motioned for her to approach the stand. I stepped aside, standing next to Silas. He said nothing, but I felt his gaze rest on me like silent acknowledgement. My mother took a deep breath and stood before the microphone. Her voice was low but steady. My name is Margaret Rivers. I was Chief Financial Officer of Conterra Group from 2001 to 2017. I confirm my participation in the approval of unlawful land transfer agreements. I knew they were wrong. And I stayed silent for far too long. On the other side, the defense attorneys stirred. One even stood to object, but the judge raised a hand. No one spoke again. My mother continued. I know I can't undo what's been done. But I'm willing to cooperate. I'll testify and name every individual involved. I don't want my grandchildren growing up thinking silence is the safest choice. I looked at her, and not with blame, but with a painful kind of surprise. Maybe she'd never been the mother I needed. But in that moment she chose right. As the hearing paused for recess, I turned to Silas. He looked at me, silently asking, "Are you okay?" I didn't answer. I just squeezed his hand, and in my heart not peace, but a clarity sharper than ever before. This was only the beginning. But for the first time I wasn't walking alone. And the truth, no matter how long it takes, was starting to find its own voice. I returned to Denver 2 months after the hearing concluded. This time there was no tightness in my chest, no secret files in my bag, no scanning the street for tails. Spring had come. The skies weren't gray anymore. Along the path leading to the State Department of Justice, bare trees had started to sprout green, soft and quiet like all real rebirths do. The reform began right after the judge issued indictments. 3 senior executives of Conterra Group, 1 city mayor, and 2 government officials were convicted. The following trials didn't need me anymore. What Josh left behind, what Silas brought forth, and my mother's confession were enough to bring down a system once thought untouchable. A major newspaper called it one of the largest land corruption crackdowns in the western United States in 3 decades. I didn't do interviews. I didn't accept speaking gigs or sign any book deals. I'd had more than enough stares, pitying, admiring, fake, to know I didn't need any more spotlight. A week after the sentences were handed down, a representative from Conterra Group sent me a settlement proposal. An 8-figure payout in exchange for a lifetime confidentiality agreement, a retraction of my testimony, and a promise never to engage in any legal matters tied to the case again. I read through the 3rd page, then closed the folder. I returned it with no letter. Just one handwritten line in blue ink at the top of the 1st page. Return the land to the people you stole it from. That's the only compensation I'll accept. Not long after, I received an internal report from Fiona Grant's legal team. Nearly 480 acres of illegally obtained land would be restored to Native communities and original landowners. The corporations were stripped of extraction rights for the next 25 years. To me, nothing would ever fully balance what had been done, but at least, the damage now had a name and was being acknowledged. My mother left town right after the non-prosecution deal took effect. She didn't tell me. Didn't say goodbye. A former City Hall staffer told me she withdrew her retirement savings, sold the house on the hill, and drove away with a suitcase and an old pickup truck. I didn't feel angry. Not anymore. The anger in me had given way to a quiet emptiness, like standing in an old, emptied house, watching the last light of the day stretch across the cold tiled floor. A few days later, when I returned to the little house in Gallatin, the one Josh and I once dreamed of restoring with a garden, I found a sealed envelope in the mailbox. No return address. No stamp. Just 2 handwritten words, Arya Rivers. I brought it inside, boiled water for tea, waited for the kids to fall asleep before opening it. Inside was a single thin sheet, handwritten in light brown ink, the neat script unmistakably familiar. Arya, now I finally understand what it means to stand on the right side. And I also know it was never easy, and even harder to survive afterward. I'm not writing to apologize. Some things can't be forgiven with words. I just want you to know that what you did, it wasn't rebellion. It was the kind of courage I never had. I hope one day when your children are old enough to understand, You'll tell them their mother never accepted silence as a way of life. And if you ever feel alone on this path, remember, someone once wished they could start over the way you did. Wishing you peace, Mom. I folded the letter and set it on the table. I didn't cry. My eyes stayed dry, as if the river had already flowed too many times and now only the dry riverbed remained. That evening, I sat on the back porch where Josh used to fix the wooden fence. The April wind carried the scent of damp earth from the garden, mingled with wildflowers just starting to bloom. I heard the giggles of the kids coming from the bedroom. And in that moment, I didn't regret a single thing I had done. I came to understand that freedom isn't about winning. It's about keeping what's right inside you intact, no matter what it costs to do the right thing. I'm no longer afraid of the choices my parents made. I just feel sad they never believed they could choose differently. But I did choose. And I still have 2 hands, a voice, and 2 children growing up in a world I've helped make a little more just. Even if just a little. 1 year passed since the hearing. Things still weren't perfectly settled, but I had learned to live without perfect peace, as long as enough good things took root in the soil once churned by lies. Today I stood in the middle of a spring field, once part of a decades-long land dispute, now the starting point of something new, a center I named Sagefield Roots. The center was built entirely from voluntary donations with no political strings, no hidden clauses. We didn't create it to celebrate victory. We built it so families who had lost everything could begin again. From clear land records to hands-on farming skills, from property rights education to community gatherings that gave forgotten voices a place to be heard. Every room, every fence post, every garden bed was put in place by hands that had once been stripped of their land in the name of progress. Silas became the center's technical supervisor, not because I asked, but because he showed up on day 1 with an old, marked-up map of the land. He walked in like the place had been waiting for him. When I asked why he stayed, he just shrugged and said, "Because someone needs to tell the difference between a water line and a line of lies." I laughed when I heard that. A real laugh, not the polite smiles I used to wear to cover pain. Here I didn't have to hide anything anymore. My 2 kids now go to school just across the field, on land that used to be an abandoned quarry. It's a small school, about 30 students. Many are children from families who once lost their land. They study academics in the morning, and in the afternoons they learn to work the soil, grow food, keep property records, understand their rights and how to protect them. The principal is a Native American man with gray hair, who lost his childhood home when his parents were forced to sell under legal pressure. He told me on the first day of school, "If we teach them early, no one will ever take anything from them again." This afternoon I spent time in the Western Garden, where we grow herbs and seasonal vegetables. Rows of kale, parsley, and young mint swayed gently under the soft sun. The earth still smelled like morning dew. I was checking the drip irrigation system when my daughter, Ella, ran up, hands full of soil, eyes bright like little flames dancing in fading light. "Mom, I planted it," she beamed, holding out a small dirt-covered hand with a bean seed half buried. "Will it grow?" I knelt beside her, brushed the sweaty hair off her forehead. I looked into those eyes no longer afraid, no longer needing to hide behind me to escape Grandma's yelling or the shadows of our past. They were the eyes of a child who knew she had the right to choose her own path. "Yes," I said softly, smiling. "And nothing will stop it now." Ella nodded and hugged me, the scent of earth and child mingling into something I imagined must be the true fragrance of life. In the distance, Silas stood beside a newly built trellis, holding a coil of twine. The sunlight highlighted the scars on his back through his shirt. He turned and waved when he saw me. I nodded in return. We didn't need words. There were no fairy tale promises between us. Only presence. And sometimes, presence is its own kind of love. That night, I helped clean up in the greenhouse with a few volunteers. One elderly woman, Miss Lydia, who once was forced to sign over her entire farm to Conterra, sat on a wooden stool peeling carrots for the community dinner. She told me, "I used to think I'd die without ever owning a patch of earth to plant a single seed. Now I don't need the land. I just need to watch these kids plant, learn, and know how to protect what's theirs." I looked at her, a quiet gratitude blooming in my chest. People like her, like Josh, like Silas, and even myself, we had all once been trampled by things called progress, power, order. But we didn't vanish. We found a way to grow again from the ruins others left behind. As night fell, I sat on the wooden bench beneath the porch of the center. The night breeze carried hints of mint and lavender. Laughter of children echoed from inside. Silas stepped out with 2 mugs of warm tea, handed me one, and sat beside me without a word. We looked out over the darkening field. In the sky, stars shimmered, tiny but steadfast, like freshly sown seeds, waiting to sprout from the soil we once thought buried forever. Have you ever wondered, if a tiny seed can push through hardened soil to reach the light, then maybe people, with all their cracks, can begin again from the very ashes they were left in? I don't have all the answers, but I believe this. Once the truth is planted, it will find its way to bloom. If you've ever stood at the edge between right and wrong, ever had to choose between your family and your conscience, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your story might be the light someone else is searching for in the dark. And if anything I've said today stirred something in your heart, even just a little, consider subscribing to this channel. Stick around for more honest, painful, and hopeful journeys about family, courage, and the way we learn to love again, through loss. Because sometimes a story isn't just meant to be told, it's meant to remind us we're not alone.